Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today would typically be Michael Becker, but he's on assignment. He is out doing some additional due diligence on a property that he's looking and his partners are looking to buy. So it is just me today in the podcast, but I have a super guest that I want you to meet. It's a gentleman that is kind of new to the multifamily business. He's purchased his first multifamily property, and I want us to kind of understand where he came from and talk a little bit about how he purchased his first multifamily property and what his vision is and what he's going to do in the future. So welcome to the podcast, Paul Grimme.
Hey, Paul.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast. We appreciate that. So, hey, listen, you own an apartment complex, huh?
Yes, seems to be.
So let's jump into it. Let's talk a little bit about what you do and what you did in the past. And tell me a little bit about the Paul Grimme story. Tell me a little bit about what you did a year ago or even 10 years ago.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I'll back up a little bit further than that, but not far. A rural boy from Nebraska. Grew up there in farming country, went to University of Nebraska and became an engineer. And after that, and graduating from there, moved to Austin, where I lived, well, we lived about 28 years there, working in high-tech, semiconductor industry. Had a chance to go overseas for half a dozen years, and so spent some time in Italy and Switzerland, and then came back here to the lovely Dallas-Fort Worth area for about 2 years, and then retired last fall.
Fantastic. So how did you find yourself wanting to invest in apartments of all things? I mean, did you ever invest in single family? You invested probably in the stock market, but apartments. You're a high technology guy. You're a senior sales marketing person. How did you make a decision to go into apartments?
Yeah. Well, knowing that retirement was coming, I think there was a little bit of planning of what we were going to do and what I was going to do with all that wonderful time after retirement. Golf wasn't going to quite cut it, especially if you've seen the way that I golf. So that wouldn't have worked. I suppose a little bit is back to my roots in rural areas where, you sort of have an appreciation for something which is real, something you can touch. And so I think in terms of an investment, I was looking for something which was that. And real estate had always been a little bit of that on and off for me, particularly a lot of residential activity. But I think it just started making some of the rounds here in DFW, got involved with a couple of the learning organizations and group organizations that specialize in commercial real estate. Found a lot of good education there with several of those communities and a lot of good engagement, socializing with a group of people that were energized and quite knowledgeable. And so really, I think one thing led to another, as is often the case. You sort of take a little step here and you get drug along, maybe a couple more steps. And eventually you find yourself really seriously thinking about, well, maybe it makes sense to buy a property and really do what everybody else has been saying.
Now, I'm a Paul. You're a Paul. I'm married to a Julie. You're married to a Julie.
How about that?
Was Julie, your wife, on board with thinking about getting to multifamily or even thinking about getting into commercial real estate?
I think she was happy to see me get engaged with something which was going to keep me busy.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be driving her crazy. But actually she's really been quite supportive. She doesn't physically always go to the property or take a look at other ones with me, but when it comes time to back office things, marketing, web capabilities, the banking structures, anything that those type of activities, she's really involved in.
Yeah, she's a very positive person, and It's always good to have a positive person
Absolutely.
On the same side of the fence on your team, and I'm glad that Julie is positive, because sometimes, spouses are not, they don't understand this, but so I always say, if you're going to get into this and you're thinking about making a transition into multifamily, make sure you get your wife on board or your husband on board to kind of understand what the heck you're doing and what the future lies.
Yeah, you want to do that. These things are big investments, not only of monetary resources, but of time. And you want to make sure you're well aligned with the rest of the family.
And they have to understand a little bit about the risk structure is, because not everything is, risk free.
Right.
So you have to understand a little bit about, are we putting our last dime into this deal? And, what's our liability in the And sometimes it's better to have those conversations up front and get them involved up front so you don't have to try to explain it yourself and kind of let somebody else explain it and have them as a third party go over what it's all about.
Yep.
So again, did you ever buy any single family properties before you got into multifamily?
No, I went straight to multifamily. It seemed to me that was going to be where I'd spend most of my energies and time. And we were fortunate to have the resources to entertain those kind of options. Uh-huh. I will tell you, I have already been pushing my youngest daughter, though, into single-family investing, just because I think they're at that stage where it makes a lot of sense for them. And they're starting with that.
Now, she's down in Austin.
She's in Austin, and they're just buying a home in San Antonio.
Oh, no kidding.
Their first one.
Is it a house that they're going to live in?
It's a lease.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So have you also invested yourself into passive ownership into an apartment building?
In fact, we started with some passives.
Okay.
Although I have to tell you, my track record here is we're just coming up on a year now in being engaged in commercial multifamily.
Sure.
But it started with, we're in 5 deals now across the state of Texas.
How many units do you think that is?
Boy, I should count those up one of these days. But I imagine it's somewhere close to 1,000 units in that range.
So you've invested in 1,000 apartment units, and we'll get to this in a second. How many units is your property that you currently own?
The property we currently own is 76 now units.
76
right,
units?
That's right.
Okay. So let's jump into the village condominiums.
Okay.
Now, how come it's not called village apartments?
It's a leading question, isn't it? The property itself is a condominium property. That's how it was originally built and currently still operated.
In what year was the property built?
They were built, the units, in 2 stages, 1982 and 1984.
So fairly new.
Yeah, they are. They're solid Class B assets.
Yeah, and they're brick assets, very high quality. So how did you find this asset? I mean, we just talked about how you're relatively pretty new to the multifamily business, and you live up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. How come you didn't find something or want to go something into the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
Yeah. I don't think we put a real restriction on a geography. There are plenty of properties in the area, but there's certainly plenty of buyers also. But we were looking more was something which would be a comfortable, high-quality asset. And I think really, as I said earlier, you sort of one step leads to another. You expand your network of people. I think it was even at a lunch that you and I had with some folks from Marcus Millichap. And that's where we started to talk about some particular properties that could be candidates. And this one was on the list. It was down the list a ways, but it was on the list. And it just sort of fell into place that this was something that could make sense for us.
So a little bit of a networking piece. How you found it is that I think you and I had lunch as kind of an introductory lunch with Marcus and Millichap.
Yep.
Got a little bit of a show and tell. You and I came together. Marcus and Millichap met us for lunch, and I kind of introduced you to them, and I gave them the thumbs up on you because I'd already seen your personal financial statement. I knew a little bit of what your game plan was.
Yeah.
So as a team member on your team, I was just kind of assisting you and trying to bring you along, which is a little bit different in single family business because it's really just that's a completely different transaction. But in the multifamily, you do need team members to put the transaction together. So
that's right, and the industry is quite a network-based industry. Often, sometimes it's who you know and that network of people that you can draw around you when you do find a deal that you want to commission.
So that group brought you a transaction for you to do, and so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
you sent over the numbers. We did the analysis in the transaction, and you made an offer. And I may be skipping ahead a little bit here. Mm-hmm. And it was accepted. So let's talk a little bit about the village condominiums. Where's that located at? Yeah,
so the property is in Waco.
Texas?
It's just right on the southern edge of the campus along I-35. Mm-hmm. You're sort of uniquely positioned there with a lot of good visibility because of the location near the interstate, but also because of the location to Baylor. It's a highly student-rented property. So it was interesting from the standpoint of the location. Again, since we weren't so worried about it had to be in DFW, Waco it's 100 miles away, but it's not really that far really,
right,
when you're considering the big scheme of things. And at first I looked at it and we said, you know what, the quality of the property is really quite interesting. But it was this notion about the fact that what was for sale was a portion of the entire unit. 74 units out of 108 in total were actually for sale.
Say that again to me because that doesn't make any sense. So a typical apartment building, it's going to be 100 units out of 100 units you're buying.
Yeah.
But in this transaction, it was how many units out of how many?
It was 74 units out of 108 in total.
So in terms of a percentage, what does that come out to be?
You're buying about 70% of the property.
Okay.
That's right.
So what type of a transaction is that called?
A fractured condo arrangement.
Fractured condo.
Sounds dangerous.
And then how did it become a fractured condo? Did they have individual owners at one period of time?
It was originally built, I think, for student housing. If you look back in the bylaws and the declarations of the HOAs back in the early 80s,
okay.
The annual homeowners meeting was scheduled on the day of Parents' Day for Baylor University every fall. So you could sort of get a feel for how it was built and why it was built that way. And indeed, the 74 units which we purchased were accumulated over a course of probably around 20 years by a finance professor there from Baylor University. And as a matter of just whenever some of those units would be picked up, a student was graduating, the parents didn't need the unit anymore, the unit was sold. And so he was eventually, after a purchase of a few, just steadily over time, accumulated 74 of them.
And so what he was doing is that he was selling a block of condominiums in the complex itself.
He was selling his share of that condominium association.
And so because he had, per the bylaws, the majority of condominiums, he could elect himself to be president of the HOA?
Yeah, and that's a really important point. When you have a fractured condo arrangement, you want to make sure that those other 30-some unit owners are not in position to be able to enforce some sort of change in dues, change in regulations, these things on your 74. So you want to make sure you have control of the way that the HOA organization is run. And by virtue of having 70%, then indeed you're right. You control all the board seats, so you're able then to set the dues, pass any additional regulations or requirements that you want to put in place. Certainly things which might encourage some of the other homeowners or unit owners to sell their units over time. And so
I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So the opportunity in this transaction was that you're buying a block of condominiums, and what you're trying to do, if you can, is buy the rest of them. We just don't want to do the block, but what you're trying to do is maybe, as the analogy would be, if you are in control of the HOA and those tenants or owners of the property, I would say, are like lobsters in cool, calm water. You're the guy in front of the stove turning the hot water on, and it's getting to be boiling water by increasing the HOA dues if you can control it. And so then what you want to do is have them sell that property to you. And then what you get at some period of time, you can convert it over from a condominium, crush the condominium association, and just have it as a regular apartment building.
Yeah.
And then we would come in and take out the loan that's against the block. And then we've been adding through it's called a guidance line. And every time the person wants to sell a unit, they're going to sell it to you. And then you get to control the majority. You already have the majority now, but you're going to get a larger majority of the condominiums in that complex, and then you can convert it over to, a Fannie Mae loan or a Freddie Mac loan or something that's right. That it's really going to make a difference, and that's where the value add, I'm going to imagine, is going to be.
That's right. Yeah, I think if you think about the way this thing comes together, you own 74 units, and there are 32 or 33 other unit owners, and combined, all of you are part of this HOA.
Correct.
And so what you want to do is make sure, one, that by virtue of the number of units you own, you have control of that HOA,
mm-hmm.
and two, that control then allows you to do things like set dues and those type of things. And eventually over time, and this is the way the previous owners were operating it, they were looking for capital improvement projects, all sorts of things that they could use to keep the dues up, to keep it a sort of an expensive place to live for those other 30-some units owners. And this is probably how they were able to accumulate all those other units over the course of the years. Mm-hmm. So it is a little bit more of a complicated arrangement for sure. But I think at the end of the day, you called it right. The end game is to accumulate the rest of the units that are there, and then take away all this complexity, get rid of the HOA, get rid of the costs that go with the HOA, and run it like a normal apartment complex.
That's right. So the fractured condominiums is a tough thing to finance, and there's not a lot of lenders that are willing to do that because there's some additional risk on it that perhaps you cannot complete the game plan about taking all those condos back to convert it. So in financing in this, Fannie Mae is not going to do it. Mm-hmm. Typically, Freddie Mac is not going to do it. The CMBS lenders are not going to do it. But it's typically going to be a regional community bank is going to take a look at it. And they're going to put a lot of faith not only to the ownership group that's buying the property, but also the sponsor, because this is going to be a recourse loan,
right?
Typically on something like this, with the hope and the belief that eventually we're going to be able to pay them off by going with permanent debt once you capture the flag of owning all the units in the property.
That's right.
So it's not an easy transaction to do, but I will brag on Paul is that he has the financial capacity to do it. He was the only investor in the transaction. It was him and Julie putting the deal together through one of their LLCs. And I think they've done a great job of structuring the deal. We liked it on the financing piece. The property is a great piece. Let's talk a little bit more physically about the property. Tell us a little bit about the property itself.
Yeah, before I do that, I'll just tell you that Old Capital is really important in helping locate the financing. We were really lucky that we had a bank locally, regional, that was involved with the property, knew it well, knew the risks that went with it, and additionally was willing to put in place a credit facility for the purchase of the other units, which we didn't own. So all of those things really made that choice very good, and you sort of helped us get directed that way. So it was really good for the deal.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the property. And before we talk about that, talk a little bit about, again, when did you buy the property, and using that implementation of the HOA fees going up, have you able to buy 1 or 2 units yet?
Yeah, so we closed on the property December 9th. So we're just about 4.5 months into it so far.
Great.
It seems longer than that, but it's only been the 4.5. But it's been a good time so far. I think, look, we purchased this from a couple who were the managers of their own 74 units. They were the managers of the HOA. They did all of the rehabbing of each individual unit themselves.
Wow.
They were about 70 years old, and they were sort of getting tired of running the place. And so there was a lot of infrastructure to put in place to replace those, not just simply 2 people, but a third-party management company, an external group of auditors that were controlling the HOA accounts, of course, the bank itself, lots of new things which were all coming together here, and everybody sort of needing to understand their roles. And Mom and Pop hadn't documented everything quite as well as you might like. So I think we spent the first few months just getting all that sort of running and people, the reporting portion of it and everything going well. Then we've got 2 different populations of residents in the facility. We've got students, and we've also opened it up to more conventional type of leasing folks as well. And those have 2 different cycles. The conventional sort of continues on regularly. The students, you've got a block. When graduation happens, a bunch of them move out. You got a bunch of them you need to get in place. And we're coming up to that point in June, July, where we'll have a number of exits. And so we've been busy leasing and getting the place up, and that's required a lot of marketing that goes along with the property. Mom and Pop said their marketing strategy was to show up at 9 o'clock, unlock the door, and then leave at 5 o'clock and lock it back up. So there wasn't a lot of exposure of the property in the name of it, so we spent a lot of time doing that.
Well, the property has great visibility off of I-35.
It does.
Have you put signs up there? Can you put signs up there? Balloons up there? I mean, what are some of the marketing ideas that you've had?
Yeah, well, we've invested in several things. We've new signage, particularly that which is visible from the high access areas like I-35. We've hired some students that are actually out working weekend events, pushing the property with promotions and the like. We spent quite a bit of time also on the website and reaching out with the social media, because this is the way a lot of the students are looking at properties.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't say enough about social media, especially in college towns.
That's right.
Like Waco, everyone is tied to their phone. It's the only way they communicate these days.
Right.
So did the folks that you bought it from, did they even have a web page?
You'll love this. I think, when was it? About 8 years ago, they had their son set it up for them, which then they promptly lost the passwords for access to it. And unfortunately for them, on that website was the posting of their rates for rent. So they just decided that it would be better just to go ahead and keep the rents as they were, because they didn't know how to get back into the website to change them. And so they never changed the rents for 8 years.
Well, you're supposed to tell the funny story at the end of the podcast. That's in the middle of the podcast.
I'm sorry. See, I did have a funny story after all. But it was good fortune for us, of course.
Yeah.
But it also sort of indicated just how active the marketing was on the property before.
That's crazy. Yeah. So I think I had asked now, since the period of time you bought it to today, have you had anybody sell?
Yeah, in fact, we've purchased 2 additional units. One got by me, and it was one which I didn't know which was for sale. And so we'll have to sort of tighten that up a little bit. I think, Paul, once we get the operations a little more stabilized, we'll probably be more aggressive about pushing into the owner's view right now in terms of we're active, we're ready to buy the units and so on, be more visible that way. Even though the one got by us, it's the student who needs it for 2 years and then they'll sell it again. So
absolutely.
They're coming back. But so we picked up a few.
And that property is a good-looking property.
It is. We like the property. I mean, you asked why tertiary markets before, and one of the reasons for not putting a restriction on it was to sort of get visibility to a property like this. It was right on the interstate. That whole area has been appreciating the real estate at 7 to 9% a year for the last several years. You see it in the appraisals, and it's continuing to appreciate in value. The ground under it was almost worth the purchase price. So at the end of the day, it was a good investment for that good quality property.
Did you feel that you had a number of people that were competing with you to buy the property? And what do you think set you apart for you to buy the property?
So by the time we got involved in the property, they were coming to the end of the first round. So I don't know how many were in that first group of people, but we managed to be able to make an offer at that point. Into the second round, we were one of 4, as I understand. And really, at the end of the day, I'm sure price was a key consideration for the seller. But at the end of the day, he also was preferring someone local, be able to purchase the property. And so the fact that we were from Texas was something which sort of was the feedback swung in our favor as well.
The seller's looking for execution certainty, so they want to make sure that if you say you're going to buy it, you're going to carry through and actually close. So that's a big deal today too.
Yeah, and I think that was part of even the screening process by the part of the realtors.
Did you go through a telephone screening process? Did you talk with the seller?
I did, sort of at my initiation, really because I was more interested about being able to prospects to purchase the rest of these units and to get to the 108. So we had a long conversation about that.
Did you ask the seller when you were on that call about some history in the property? And did that help you in some of your due diligence when you were awarded the deal, that you kind of knew the back history of the transaction directly from the seller?
Yes, I think so. Because this thing was built in a couple of different phases, because the HOAs were there operating the property, there were nuances about that model, and he was able to shed some light on that.
That's good.
Yeah.
So how long did it take for you guys to do your physical due diligence on the property? Did you do it yourself, or did you have a third party come in and kind of scope the pipes a little bit and take a look at the roof and everything that has to be done to make sure that you're not buying a problem?
Yeah, I think we were fortunate in this case. We were able to have 21 days of due diligence.
Okay.
And so it wasn't such high pressure as some other deals are. But we had third-party management come in and do much of the due diligence, at least associated with the physical asset itself.
Right.
When it came time to looking at the HOA and what was happening there and that structure, that was more up to me.
Was there anything that you found in your physical due diligence that made you pause a little bit, or?
You had to understand the model, because the costs are sort of hidden within it. And so as a property owner, even though I'd managed the HOA, I was still just a property owner of 74 units.
Right.
And what I had to do was pay my dues to the HOA every month, and then the HOA pays all the bills, all those stuff. So what you had to do was look a little bit beyond the pro forma that was in the offering memorandum, because here it was often a fairly sterile, this is the cost of the 75 units, and maybe, or 74, and maybe some prorated costs from the HOA that were in there, but it was a little convoluted.
Yeah, because you come with almost 2 sets of books.
You do. And in fact, today we run a set of books for the HOAs and a set of books for our 76 units.
And I think that's the legal way of doing it. I don't think you could, because it's an LLC that has the HOA, and then you have your ownership in a separate LLC, but the HOA was formed back in 1982 or so. And
the books are still audited and so on, so you keep those separate.
Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. You talked about third-party property management. So you have a third-party property management company that manages your 70-plus units. How come you don't manage it yourself?
Yeah. Well, somewhere along the way of the learning, I think I remember the phrase, you want to work for your business but not work in your business.
That's right.
And we weren't looking to work in our business. We could have tried to replace mom and pop from before, and that's working in your business, and that just wasn't really of interest for us. So third party was really the only way to go. Then it was more a matter of, do you pick somebody in the local in the area of Waco? Do you pick somebody from DFW? What do you do? And so we got a lot of referrals from folks that I trust in the industry and picked a third-party management company out of DFW.
Okay.
Yeah.
So looking back on this property and everything that you found out about the property, the structure of the HOA, would you do it again?
Yes. It's a lot of work, but I suppose because it's my first one, that's sort of where the bar is. And so that's the model that I understand that you have to manage and so on. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And if anything, that's taught me quite a bit about the inner workings of how that would be. But I think it's been interesting because once you sort of learn that model, then you start to understand what you can do to reduce the cost, make it more efficient, and so on. And then that sort of gives you a good strategy for what you want to do with the property.
Mm-hmm. What's your 24-month goal on the property? What are you guys looking to do? Any improvements to the property itself? You're going to try to capture more units?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes. What we want to do is get the property operational, stabilized. We want to continue to use capital projects as a way to keep the HOA budget at a pretty high level. Mm-hmm. And so we've gone from parking lots and so on to now looking at covered parking. Potentially on the horizon, there could be solar panels, which would help the property offset electric costs in the upcoming years. So things like that, I think, will be something which we'll continue on with. That'll keep the dues where they are, or maybe a little higher. Then what we want to do is go after some accelerated acquisition of the rest of the units, because really the sooner that we can close out the HOAs and all that infrastructure around it, the more simple life becomes, lower costs, and that's really where you realize then the overall value increase in the property.
And that's exactly it. Looking for another property, another acquisition out there? And how are you finding the market to be on your next transaction?
I'm getting asked that a lot these days. Look, we have another 30, 34, 32 units to pick up. And so that's one area of real estate acquisition that we're going to do one way or the other. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we started looking at some other deals. There's some case to be made that we could leverage some of the current infrastructure in Waco and look for some other deals in that area. That could be something. But I don't think we're going to be that serious yet until probably a little later this year when we get past this leasing, this cycle with the students and go after, set a program in place for more unit acquisition. And then I think we'll be ready to go take on something new. Maybe something which is a little more conventional, and then we'll have a benchmark between this model and the conventional model.
How big of a property are you looking for deal number 2, would you think?
100 to 150 units,
yeah,
somewhere in that range.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I asked you about self-management. It just doesn't make economic sense, especially, your job is supposed to be an asset manager, to go out there and find a new property, raise the money if you needed to through, different investors, different partners that you meet along the way.
Yeah.
And just manage the management company and have the great relationship with your investors, but not to manage inside the business itself. That's just not what you do.
That's right.
I pound the table on that, not to become a manager. And don't look for maybe, people say, I want to go with maybe 25 doors or 30 doors. It just doesn't make economic sense to do it.
Right.
You can't pass those costs on to hire the best manager or even marketing person or maintenance person if you don't have the number of units to do it. So
yeah, I think where we're at in our strategy of acquisition and more units and possibly another property or two, I think third-party management fits our model really well. If we were scaling up something to something much higher than that, then forming your own company is probably something you want to do, but we're not there.
So in a typical week, what are the one or two things that you spend the most time on and why?
I think right now I spend a lot of it just on the operations of the property.
Okay.
The leasing, the rehab, which is currently underway as well. I didn't mention that, but we're actively rehabbing a number of the units on property. And then just the general operations of it, making sure that the third-party management company is getting the reporting correct and those type of things. So it's all about operations right now.
Has there been one habit that has contributed to the most amount of your success, whether this deal or in life? I mean, you're an engineer by training, I guess, so you have a checklist mentality. We've seen a lot of engineers do very well in this business. Do you think being a semi-perfectionist like that you are would definitely help other people?
I can't help but think that some of the organizational skills and methodology helps you keep it all straight. On the other hand, it can be also an occupational hazard because you can spend too much time doing spreadsheets and too much time doing models and these type of things, which, surprise, surprise, when I go back and I look at some of the things I was doing before close, I don't even look at those things anymore because they're not valid or not realistic. So I suppose somewhere in between, a curse can also be a blessing. You just have to make sure you know which is which.
Analysis paralysis, so to speak. Is there any advice that you'd give somebody that was looking to go into apartments as an investment or even as a managing member like you? You know, you're the guy who's in the back of the airplane and you're the co-pilot and also you're the captain of the airplane. You're doing everything because it's your transaction. But how about for somebody going in that's kind of putting together a partnership or even investing in a deal? Do you still like multifamily investing? Do you still see the value of doing it?
I do. I would say, again, we're a year into this journey of doing this, but I'm less skeptical than I would have been a year ago. But does it really make sense? Do you really see the returns? Does it all work like they teach you or tell you? And in fact, we're starting to see the answer is yes in many cases. So I think that would be a check mark of endorsement, I think, to the activity. I think you always have to be careful not to underestimate complexity because even in the simplest of deals, if something feels a little complex to you when you're evaluating the deal, it probably will be that and more when you actually are acquiring it and managing it. And there's nothing wrong with complexity. There's also a lot of hidden value that can be unlocked in complexity. But it's something which can be overlooked and which is something that maybe could bite you a little later on if you're not careful.
Now, some of the biggest problems that people have these days is trying to get their first deal. And now you've gotten your first deal. Is kind of like crack the code. Mm-hmm. It was tough probably to have people recognize you that you wanted to buy an apartment building without actually owning an apartment building. Now you own an apartment building. How has it been easier to, are brokers calling you now wanting to take you to lunch versus before? Now you got a little bit of the Willy Wonka golden ticket, and a lot of these brokers maybe bring you deals because now you're a proven entity that you can close.
I think that's true. I mean, you have a level of credibility established once you actually have gone through the whole cycle. You've purchased the property, you've closed, you're operating it, and so on. And so people will naturally bring things to you that they feel comfortable you could execute on if indeed you wanted to do that. So the answer is yes. But I think as long as you're patient, you'll get there. Whether you're passive or whether you're part of a management team of one or whether you actually own one outright, that credibility comes. But once it comes, then yeah, absolutely, you're there. People do approach you.
Yeah, as Michael Becker says, it's a completely unfair business, and I have to agree.
Yeah, that's right.
Any additional advice for people that are just looking to get into multifamily, period? You've said that you like the business, but any words of wisdom that you wish you knew back then that you know now, looking at a Paul Grimme back a year and a half ago before you got into this? Anything that you would want to tell yourself?
I think I would tell everybody, for those that are sort of doubters out there still, or whether they can do something like this or not, it's doable. It's absolutely doable. And you'll hear that many times from many folks, but in fact, I'll tell you that again. From my experience, it's doable. But the other thing I would say is to make it that way, and for those people that have decided it's doable, just make sure you surround yourself with really good people. There are a lot of good people that are here, from attorneys to mortgage brokers to real estate agents and the like. There are folks out there that you need to and will want to draw on their skill set to make sure the deal is successful for you. So they're readily available. Just make sure you do that.
And here's the last question. Does Julie sleep at night?
Julie sleeps pretty well at night.
So we haven't kept her up yet. So
that's right.
So thank God with that. So if people wanted to learn more about what you do and maybe reach out to you, what's probably the best way to reach out to Paul Grimme? I
think email would be really the best way. And if you send any inquiries to Paul at Cherokee Creek Investments, that's CherokeeCreekInvestments.com.
Can you spell Cherokee? Because
yeah, CheroKee, CreekInvestments.com. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or inquiries.
Well, that's great. And that in the website for the Village condominiums, Is there some place on there that we can get some of that great swag you're wearing today? so Paul has a brand new Village Condominiums polo shirt that looks absolutely great.
Oh, gee, thank you.
That
was part of our marketing too.
It looks great, and I'll tell you the reason why it looks great is that the Village Condominiums is in yellow and the shirt is green, so it has those Baylor University colors.
Not chosen by mistake, I'll tell you that. VillageCondos.com.
VillageCondos.com. So we appreciate Paul coming in, spending a little time on the front side of the transaction.
Yeah.
We usually like to have people in there for a number of months, but I thought everybody would like to kind of hear about a fractured condominium. That's an unusual transaction to get structured and financed. So thanks for telling us a little bit about how you did it. If anybody wants to find out any additional information about structuring apartment buildings, Old Capital has a 15-page white paper report on structuring and financing apartment buildings. Go to the oldcapitalpodcast.com website, oldcapitalpodcast.com. Again, the 15-page report that you can sign up to get. Plus, there's a due diligence report, too. And that's Michael Becker's due diligence report. That's what he uses when he is under contract to find an apartment building. That's kind of a 2-page checklist to make sure you're asking the seller the right questions and make sure you get the information from the seller of what they should be providing if they can. So make sure you sign up for that. Again, Paul, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. Tell Julie we said hello.
You bet.
I'm Paul Peebles. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.